Do you know what time it is? It's Supernatural Storytime. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. The Graveyard in the Woods. Our story begins with a little history of this wonderful location. It's a 200-year-old cemetery surrounded by what is now a forest preserve. It was abandoned in the 1950s and has been ravaged by vandalism and graffiti ever since. Al Capone was rumored to use an adjacent swamp as a dumping ground for bodies, and the place is claimed to have phantom houses and mysterious lights, and white ladies looking for their stillborn children. But this is my story. My brother Paul and I heard about this place dozens of times from some of the older kids in the neighborhood, so one night we decided to check it out. We brought along our friend Mike and Jackie for the ride. After ditching our bike by the service road that leads to it, we began our way in. First thing one may notice is how the forest seems to swallow you up. The road was one car width, but the trees above us seemed to reach out and form a hollow as we walked down the road. We didn't have any flashlights, just Paul's lighter, and it was a new moon that night. Darkness quickly enveloped us as we walked a quarter mile to the cemetery. As we began talking about what we hoped to see and how awesome it was that we were doing this, I noticed that Mike was very silent and staring forward the whole time. I got the sense that all of us noticed this because we all stopped talking and stared forward into the woods. To this day, I can't describe what it was. It was a vague, shapeless mass in the middle of the woods, about 300 yards from us, and it was moving, and always moving away from us. It kept the same distance as we watched it and walked forward. After a few seconds of this, I whispered to Paul, "I'm going to run ahead, right at it. You guys stay here and hopefully we can find out what it is." Out of all of us, I was the fastest runner, so it was really agreed. I took off running down this dirt road towards something I can't describe, in the complete darkness. As soon as I took off, though, it disappeared. But that didn't stop me. I kept running. I didn't stop until I was at the very spot where I had seen whatever that was. A chill went up my spine when I realized where I was. Looking to my left, I could see a wide opening in the trees, just enough to let in some starlight, and directly in front of me, the wrought iron gates to the cemetery. The creepiness of the situation was enough to keep me from entering until the others caught up. The gates had a steel chain around them, but with enough slack to allow us to squeeze through. The cemetery was in ruins. Headstones and trees fallen over, graves sunken in from collapsed coffins, and the remains of a small empty mausoleum rotting away in the corner. No one saw anything for a while. The moonlight danced around us as we looked at our surroundings. It wasn't until about 10 minutes after we entered that we heard the first unnatural sound. It was a loud thump that came from the far end of the cemetery. All of us slowly walked over to that half and kept our senses on high alert, but we saw nothing. The wind kicked up, the trees swayed in the moonlight. Holy shit, I forgot it was a new moon tonight. That isn't moonlight. Realizing that it was a figure, we all stood still and watched it float silently across the graveyard. It was at least 8 feet tall and had a slight bluish hue to it. Every now and then it would stop, and we would hear that loud thump. Then it would move on. It paid no attention to us at all, and I got a little adventurous. I crept up to it when it got somewhat close to us to see what it was doing and what was making that sound. It was lifting the headstones and throwing them. That was the sound that we were hearing, the headstones hitting the ground. Some of these were easily 500 pounds, but this thing was chucking them like nothing, and it still paid no attention to us. We could never really get close to it, but for 10 minutes, it was just going about its business. And then it vanished. It disappeared without a trace right before our eyes. Then we heard a different sound, people talking. It sounded kind of mechanical and far away. The sound got closer and closer and closer still, and then we heard it clearly and knew what it was. A police radio. We all rushed to the gates, and sure enough, a couple of cops or walking their way down the service road. Mike and Jackie freaked and ran to the end of the graveyard and started climbing the fence. Paul started climbing through the gate, but I was caught by something in the corner of my eye, the blue phantom. He was back, at the very corner of the graveyard, furthest from the gate. I don't know why I did it, but I grabbed Paul and ran to Mike and Jackie. I got them to follow me to the corner with the phantom. He disappeared again when we were about 10 feet away, but he left us a surprise. A tear in the fence, wide enough for 2 people, and on the other side of it was the swamp. A short walk through the woods back to the main road, and we were in the clear. I've gone back to the cemetery in the woods a few times more before it was declared federally protected land and patrolled almost daily. But I never experienced anything else again. An Alaskan tale. When I was young, my family had a tradition of visiting my grandparents every Sunday morning. I can still vividly remember the feeling of overwhelming joy as I sprung up from my bed at the first ray of light that penetrated my window and lit up the room. I always made an excited, childish squeal as I quickly scampered off into my parents' bedroom, slamming their door inward against the wall on the way in, and jumping onto their bed screaming, "Wake up! It's Sunday, time to go to Grandpa's and Grandma's." In retrospect, I give my parents props for not eventually backhanding me off the bed, as I did this every single Sunday morning at 6 a.m. When my family arrived at my grandparents' house, we were always greeted with the rich, sweet aroma of my grandmother's freshly cooked maple syrup-filled French toast and cinnamon-sprinkled oatmeal for breakfast, with a side of juicy orange slices. My grandma was a stereotypical old white lady, rosy cheeks and all. She cared for me and my brother when we were younger from time to time, and I don't say this with animosity, but there was nothing very unique about her. She was just a typical grandma. My grandpa, on the other hand, was a man of unique interest. A greaser in his youth, he was a rugged and very philosophical individual, and wasn't the warm, affectionate type, at least not until years after he had had his grandchildren. He didn't talk much at all about his past, other than that he had worked off the coast of Alaska, where we lived, as a fisherman for quite a few years after he had graduated high school in '49. But what I always found a little odd was that when I once questioned him about his experiences at sea, asking him if he ever missed his old job, he quickly snapped at me and remarked that it was a dark time in his life and that he doesn't like to talk about it. Nor did he want me to ever ask about it again, and so I didn't. I still remember the tone in his voice when he scolded me. It didn't come off as mad, to my relief and surprise, but rather he seemed sad, maybe even a little afraid. His voice slightly trembled, and I could tell he was trying to maintain composure, but I never really thought much of it, at least not until years later. Right around his 60th birthday, my grandpa had slowly begun to give up his strong and rugged demeanor and started becoming friendlier and more proactive with the family. He, my brother, my dad, and I started a trend on Sundays of playing handball at the local park. He wasn't the best at the game, but he seemed happy just to be spending time with us. In fact, that was the happiest I had ever seen him. When we got back from the park, and only until my grandma had made sure my brother and I had finished our supper, my grandpa used to have us lay down by the fireplace and began telling my brother and I story after story, all of them usually old folks' tale that his grandpa had told him decades prior. But I was none the wiser, and thought they were all real. All the stories were light-hearted, as my brother and I were still children. My brother and I simply sat on the fuzzy wool-covered ground, soaking up the warmth of the crackling fireplace, while we followed every word of his awe-inspiring tales. Over the course of the next few years, without fail, he had a new story to tell us every time we went to the house. He must have told us hundreds of stories. Stories of heroes and heroines, stories of witches and wizards. He brought up a plethora of unique and diverse characters, and the enchanting settings in which they lived. Hell, sometimes I thought that he made some up along the way, but we loved all of them nonetheless. On one particular Sunday morning, everything started out as it normally did. I woke up and slammed into my parents' bed, shaking them awake, the usual routine. We arrived at my grandparents' house at the normal time, but as soon as we opened the door, something was amiss. There was no sweet aroma of French toast and oatmeal this morning. Instead, we were greeted with one half-empty bowl of soggy live cereal and an unsettling kind of ghostly silence which flowed throughout the dimly lit and narrow hallways of the house. We searched the house for any signs of life, but found none. This was before the invention of the cell phone, so we had no way of contacting either of my grandparents. And so we waited. As time progressed and the hours passed, there was still no sign of my grandparents. By this time, we started to worry. We thought up ideas like kidnapping, murder, etc. I come from a family of worrywarts. But there were no signs of forced entry, nor was there any sign of a struggle. Everything was where it was supposed to be. The TV still in place, no broken glass on the ground, nothing. Stranger yet, both of my grandparents' cars were still in the driveway. At around 4, my parents and my brother had decided to take the family dog on a walk around the local community park. I decided to pass on the opportunity and use the time alone to play on my grandparents' NES, a lifesaver that my brother and I always utilized whenever we were bored, and kept watch to see if either my grandma or grandpa showed up. No more than 2 minutes after the family left, there was a faint knock on the door. Thinking it was my parents, I thought to myself, what did they forget this time? I swung open the door. It wasn't my parents. There stood, pale-faced, soaking from head to foot, and expressionless, was my grandpa. "Grandpa," I said in confusion and relief, "are you okay? Where have you been? Why are you all wet? And where's Grandma?" He immediately flinched when I brought up Grandma, but then immediately returned to his flat, emotionless face. "I'm fine," he said monotonically, while obviously ignoring my other questions. "Where are your parents, your brother?" They're walking around the park. You just missed them. If we hurry, we can go get..." He cut me off. "No," he yelled, causing me to tear up. He continued, "Sorry, kiddo. No, that's fine. Come with me," he said robotically. "We should go before they get back. I want to show you something." In the driveway was an unfamiliar white, unlicensed van. "Whose car is this?" I asked nervously. "It's mine for now. I borrowed it from a friend. Now hurry and get in. I'll explain everything on the way." These words brought comfort to me at the time, even though the emotionless tone in his voice still creeped me out. I thought I could trust him because, after all, he was my grandpa. I would soon learn, however, how naive I was. I began to walk with him to the car and hopped up into the front seat, a privilege that I felt I was reserved only for me. My parents had always forced me to sit in the back when I was a kid because it was safer. So whenever 8-year-old me went on a drive with my grandpa, I became ecstatic. I felt like a true grown-up. Only this time, I didn't want to feel like a grown-up. I felt scared and uneasy, and my gut kept telling me to get out now, before it's too late. But I tried to remain as calm as possible and told myself over and over again that nothing was going to happen. He's my grandpa. He'll protect me. He's never hurt me. However, even though I kept telling myself this, I couldn't convince myself of it. By this point, I was more than afraid. I was terrified, and I was certain that he could tell. I had so many questions I wanted to ask him. Is Grandma okay? When will she be back? When will we be back? Shouldn't we have let my parents know where we're going? They're going to get worried. They might even call the cops. Although my thoughts were going through my head at this time, all at light speed, all I could muster out of my trembling mouth was, "Where are we going?" I turned to him, expecting a reaction, at least a slight turn of his head. Nothing. His pale, wrinkled face continued to remain expressionless, and his glazed-over eyes seemed to be plastered onto the windshield of the beat-down van. Not a word was mustered for what seemed like an hour, and with each second that grudgingly ticked by, I became more and more afraid to speak up. Finally, and surprisingly, just as the Alaskan coast came into view, his eyes still glued to the road, he opened his mouth and asked in an unnaturally calm and unnerving voice, Remember when you asked me about life at sea, son? Yes, I responded. Do you know why I never wanted to talk about it? He asked rhetorically. I knew this day would come. What do you mean, Grandpa? We have a family curse, boy. You have to understand that I never wanted this to happen. I'm sorry. I brought the curse upon our family. It's my fault. His eyes began to fill with tears as we approached the shoreline of the Alaskan coast. What do you mean? What's your fault, Grandpa? I asked. He turned to me and began to sob. I'll see you soon, boy. I love you. He then grabbed what looked like a long rod, maybe a rifle. Then in an instant, everything went black. He had bashed my head in with the object. When I came to, I remember a choking sensation. I was underwater and I was drowning. I felt as if my lungs were going to explode as water quickly rushed into them. My adrenaline kicked in and my fight-or-flight response had caused me to flail my arms toward the light that radiated off the surface of the water. As I reached the surface, I gasped deeply for air. I began to vomit up the water I had just inhaled and came to the realization that I was going into hypothermic shock, and quickly. Luckily, although I was disoriented, bloodied from the head trauma, and going into shock, I was conscious enough to notice the shoreline was no more than 100 feet away from me. I limply began doggedly paddling toward it, going under the numbing water a few times along the way. As I came within the final few feet, I heard something splashing from behind me and quickly gaining ground on me. In panic, I turned my torso to see what it was that was causing the sound. Now, although I was out of it and ready to pass as soon as I reached the shore, this image will forever be seared into my brain. What I saw behind me was a woman. And although she had the face of a woman, she was more monster than she was human. This woman had smooth skin, from what I could tell, but was dead white pale. And when I say pale, I mean whiter than the whitest cloud in the sky on a summer day. Although it had the face of a woman, it was exaggeratedly deformed and anorexic. Its jaw stretched open into a kind of cartoonish, ghoulish figure, revealing its small but numerous razor-sharp teeth. The creature's eyes seemed like the appropriate size for its face, but looked like they were rolled into the back of its head, since I could see the pink of what I now believed to be its optic nerve. Its shoulders expanded nearly 4 or 5 feet wide, and although it didn't seem to have the muscle for it, it was coming right for me at the speed of a racehorse. I screamed. My adrenal glands was being wrung out like a sponge. I turned back and swam full stroke back to the shore as fast as my 8-year-old body could take me. All I could focus on as I swam back was the gaining sound of pat, pat, pat on the water directly behind me. Luckily and miraculously enough, as soon as I was within 4 or 5 feet of the shore, I caught a small wave and body surfed the rest of the way. As soon as my feet touched the ground, my legs instinctively continued to carry on and I sprinted for a while. I don't remember much other than the feeling of fear after that, and everything went black once again. I woke on the edge of the street of the beach with an oxygen mask over my face, which was being held in place by a paramedic. I was rushed to a local hospital and had to go through some x-ray scans due to the head injury that my grandpa had given me. Apparently a local lighthouse attendant saw me passed out from the nearby lighthouse and called 911. My parents kept asking me what had happened, and out of fear of being put in a straitjacket, I saw that it happened to people on TV who told crazy stories. I simply told them that I was with Grandpa, and everything went black after that. They started to cry. From that day on, no one ever saw my grandpa, nor my grandma ever again. I've never told a single soul about this story until now, and it's tormented me every day since. The Crawler. I work at the front desk of a fairly large hotel in northern Sweden. I work shifts, and even though I work mornings and evenings the most, I sometimes have to work nights. I didn't mind much when my boss first approached me with the offer. The pay is way better than working days, and also, I usually can't sleep at night, so it's rather perfect. When I first started, I asked my coworker, gently, I didn't want them to think that the new girl was weird, if the place was haunted. Unsurprisingly, they told me about the white lady and her mother, the black lady who haunts the building. Apparently in 1901, the hotel was built in 1852. The white and black lady stayed there. I can't find any information about their true names. And they were celebrating the white lady's upcoming wedding. The white lady was against it. Her mother forced her to marry a much older, wealthy man. The man was abusive and had on this particular night locked his bride into their hotel room. Seeing no other way to be free from this evil man, the woman hung herself in the room. Overcome with grief, her mother lived the rest of her days in guilt and died from old age many years later. She now roams the halls looking for her daughter. The white lady often shows herself to guests, but never to employees. The black lady shows herself to whomever says they don't believe in her. A waiter once locked in the restaurant alone when he heard a noise coming from the dining area. When he went to check to see who was there, he saw the black lady walking around amongst the tables. She turned her head and looked at him before vanishing into thin air. He ran out, forgot to lock up, and swore he never would be down there alone again. These are the ghosts that are famous for this place. No one has ever seen nor heard anything else. But one night, while I was working, I was standing in the back office doing some random paperwork when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It looked like someone crawling on all fours, slow and steady. I snapped my head and expected whatever it was to disappear, but I kept seeing this crawling figure for 2 or 3 seconds before it disappeared. I can't say it vanished into thin air or something, it was just gone. 1 second it was there and the next it just wasn't. I didn't see any features. It looked just like a black mass on all fours. It felt like I got a bucket of ice water over my head, and I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was tired. It was, after all, after 3 a.m. I didn't want to believe anything else, not when I had to spend another 2 hours alone. I didn't see it again, and eventually I convinced myself that it was all in my head. That was until a couple of weeks later, when I was chatting with one of the receptionists, who was a full-time night auditor. She told me she had been wiping down some of the tables in the lounge just outside the dining hall when she saw the reflection of the elevator door open in the glass doors leading into the dining hall. Out of the elevator came a man, slowly crawling on all fours. She spun around, but all she saw was the elevator door still open, but no man. She was so freaked out, she lit every light and stayed the rest of the night away from the elevator. When she told me about this, I instantly went cold, and I realized that my encounter with the crawler, after all, had been very real. We started doing some research, and it turned out that the restaurant downstairs is really a basement from a previous building built in the 1400s. While the restaurant was being built, the wall and the roof collapsed, killing at least 4 of the workers. They had been digging too close to the old basement, not knowing it was just a few feet behind the wall they were tearing down. Apparently, some of them tried to crawl out but got stuck and died underneath the rubble. No one that works here has heard nor seen the crawler before, and we have no idea why he suddenly decided to show himself to some of us in the middle of the night. A friendly haunting. Since I was born and raised in Southern California, where urban development is relatively new since compared to older states in the Union, I never really experienced much paranormal activity throughout my childhood. The oldest buildings in my neighborhood growing up are from the 70s, so there wasn't much time for shit to go down and the ghouls to come around. However, that changed when I moved to Nashville, Tennessee in the fall of 2012 to start college at Belmont University. Since I lived on campus, I had no means of attaining money for all the fun extracurricular activities. I was involved with mostly Wendy's, beer, liquor, and weed. I decided to get a part-time job. I had heard from a classmate who worked in the dining office that they had openings on the campus catering company, so I applied for a position and was hired on the spot. It was the perfect job for me at the time. I had flexible part-time hours, and I didn't have to worry about getting a ride to work because the catering kitchen was in the building right outside my dorm. It wasn't easy work, but I enjoyed the people I worked with, and I made enough to supplement my activities. During the Christmas season, I worked at private black-tie dinner events for the Ackland family in the Belmont Mansion, the oldest and by far the creepiest building on campus. Nashville, being a very old southern city, has a rich history with several pre-Civil War era buildings still standing to this day. The Belmont Mansion is the historical and extravagant former residence of billionaire widow Adelicia Ackland. The place definitely has a creepy vibe. Right as I entered the front entranceway, I noticed the Y-shaped staircase that led to the upper levels. The black and white staircase split up the sides of the walls like devil horns, ascending from a warped wooden floor. There were many old photos and painted portraits with eyes that seemed to follow you around the room. Considering that Adelicia's first fiancé, her 2 husbands, and 6 of her children died untimely deaths, it's not out of the question to think the place may be a little haunted. Overall, the event I was working that night seemed pretty normal. Aside from the eerie feeling I got when I looked at the portraits on the wall, it was really just a bunch of old, rich white people getting dressed up and stuffing their faces with 5 courses of Sodexo's fine catering. It was nothing to be scared of. Just to look into the deep-seated old money social club that is the American South. Late in the night, after all the guests had left, it was time to clean, and I was bussing a table in one of the side rooms just off the main dining hall when I found an airplane-sized bottle of Sky vodka under a chair. As I picked up the small bottle of liquor, I came up to see that the woman who was hosting the event, the granddaughter of Adelicia Ackland, was standing right behind me. She was a sweet and unassuming white lady, probably in her late 60s, wearing a black velvet dress adorned with pearl earrings and diamond jewelry. She laughed and said something to the tune of, "Some of our guests got a little out of hand tonight. You should hold on to that." Needless to say, I accepted the gratuity and promptly enjoyed it once I got off my shift, not thinking much of the incident. Flash forward nearly 1 year, and I had moved on to different horizons. I had gotten a new job as a host at a brewery just walking distance from campus. I liked catering, but I got paid more to do less work as a host, so the choice was not hard. The building was very old with crumbling brick walls and creaky wooden stairs that didn't seem safe. Also, it is important to mention that this brewery was in the corner of 21st and Ackland Avenue. You can still find the building, but the business has since shut down. It was pretty slow Wednesday, so I decided to take a look at the latest issue of Native Magazine, a local zine that focused on small businesses and the music scene. To my surprise, there was a feature article on the grandiose mausoleum of Adelicia Ackland, where she rests with many of her deceased family members. I pointed the article out to Chuck, a waiter who had walked over to the host stand, and remarked about the time when I worked an event in the Belmont Mansion, and the place gave me the creeps. I don't recall mentioning the vodka bottle, but I wouldn't be surprised if I had. This conversation took place 2 days before Halloween, hence the mausoleum cover piece. About an hour went by and I went to wipe down a table in Chuck's section where 2 middle-aged men had just left. This particular table was directly in front of the host stand, and since I was quite bored, I was watching these men for some time. Nothing about them was alarming, but as I went to wipe down the table, I noticed something strange in the chair of the man who had his back facing toward me. In the middle of the seat was a crumpled and worn brown paper bag, like the ones you used to pack school lunches. I could tell something was in it, but I wanted to keep this score for myself, so I took it back to my host stand to check it out. To my surprise, I pulled out an unopened, airplane-sized bottle of Kentucky bourbon whiskey. If this were any other day or time, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. But being as I had discussed my experience at the mansion, and the image was fresh in my mind, I was taken aback. I immediately went to my manager to discuss what had just happened. She told me that she has also had ghostly experiences in here too, but nothing terrifying. Once she was in very early prepping silverware for a large private party by herself. She had folded all the napkins over the silverware for each place setting on a long rectangular table. She turned around for a moment, and when she turned back again, all of the napkins lay flat with the silver exposed. She gasped and was freaked out, but survived and went about her day. After this story, I was relatively convinced that the ghost of Adelicia Ackland had been stalking me with the intention not to hurt me, but to try to give me free drinks. Coincidence? Or is this a case of the best haunting possible? As far as I'm concerned, Adelicia can keep them coming. Note, I quit drinking a year ago due to health issues, and have not been offered any more haunted liquor bottles since the last. Night Terrors. This is an event that happened this most recent Halloween. No one in our group has really spoken of it since it happened. I've done some follow-up, and I'm afraid that my curiosity might get the best of me. Allow me to explain. I was working this last Halloween at a small bar on the outskirts of town. As a result, I missed out on most of the events that transpired that night. The bar I work at is more of a seedy stop for truckers and not really what you'd call a party haven. So I felt left out of all the fun since my friends got to go out to the more happening clubs. When I got off of work, I texted my friend Jay to see if there was any house parties to go to afterwards. He replied and told me he was at this girl's house. I didn't know her that well and didn't know where she lived, so I got some detailed directions. They needed to be detailed because the girl lived in kind of a weird spot. The house was in a trailer court type area. To get there, you have to drive onto a side street that is rather difficult to see if you don't know where it is, past this old building, then go down this pitch black road for a moment or two. Then this trailer court area kind of appears out of nowhere. I figured out exactly which house it was and called Jay, telling him to meet me outside. I didn't want to have misheard his directions and go walking into the wrong house at 2:30 a.m. He came out and we went in and I took a look around. Inside of the house is the girl, along with Derek and Leon. Derek and Leon were also buddies of mine, but I didn't know them as well as Jay. There's another girl I don't know, but apparently she is friends with a girl who lives there. So all in all, there are 6 of us, counting myself. Started out as rather laid back and very boring ordeal. Both of the girls were pretty drunk and being somewhat obnoxious. All my male friends were pretty much done for the night and were starting to fade fast. I had originally come in with energy, but also started to quickly die down myself as I saw this night was probably going nowhere. Then she appeared, out of nowhere. This girl appeared behind me. Allow me to describe the layout of this house to attempt to make this easier to visualize. The living room was one big long connected room. As you walked into the house, the living room extended to a hallway that led to bedrooms on the left. In the very center was a bathroom. To the right, where most of us were hanging out, was a kind of an open area that had a large dining table and a large open archway that led to the kitchen and to a back door. I was standing in the archway to the kitchen with my back to the rear door of the house when she appeared. The thing is, no one heard her come in. No one heard the door open. She was just there. She was dressed in this very strange costume. It's rather difficult to describe just what she was wearing. It was a faded black costume that looked like it was hundreds and hundreds of different straps of different materials. It covered her entire body, like some kind of gothic mummy. Everything but her eyes and her mouth were covered on her face. Even the ears on this woman were wrapped tight in the dark material. At the top of her head, the material was fashioned into large devil-type horns that curved inward. Her eyes were very, very dark brown, almost black. She had a dark purplish lipstick on her mouth. Truth be told, there was something about her that instantly sickened me when I saw her. She never stood still the entire time either. She was constantly moving in this slow, fluid, almost tribal dance way. Not like she was actually dancing, but as if some kind of sublime and unnerving energy was constantly flowing through her. I honestly didn't even want to make eye contact with her, and I am not a socially awkward person. It was as if everyone noticed her at once. The girl who owned the house said, hello. The dark-clothed girl made her way closer to us. She got very close to me, and I honestly turned away and took a few steps back. I wanted to be nowhere near her. She finally spoke. Do you know me? She almost hissed as she spoke. Her voice was much more raspy than what you would expect from a woman. I looked over at the owner of the house, awaiting her answer, but it honestly seemed as if the dark-clothed woman was speaking to all of us. Seeing as how the girl who owned the place was the initial one to talk to her, she seemed obligated to reply. You don't look familiar. You should all know me. You all know me if you tell the truth. Tell the truth that you know me, because I know you." As she rasped the last word of that sentence, her hand made a sweeping gesture to everyone standing around in the room. It was at this moment that I realized her fingers were unnaturally pointy. Part of the costume? For my sanity's sake, I had to assume it was. Derek cleared his throat, sat up in his chair, and tried to normalize the situation. "I think I know you." Like a shot, the dark-clothed woman slid right up next to him, inches away from Derek's face. He suddenly reared back and continued, You're Holly's sister, right?" The woman shook her head, then put her pointy index finger up to Derek's lips. "Shh." Still moving in that weird, slow-flowing mannerism. What the hell was wrong with this woman? The front door to the house suddenly opened. Two other guys, who I had never seen before, came drunkenly stumbling into the house. The abruptness of their arrival seemed to initially startle everyone, but was a welcome break in the tension. They immediately started talking to the girl who owned the house. The initial conversation between them wasn't really anything significant. It was just a regular drunken rabble that people partake in upon the first arrival to a laid-back house party. As a conversation between the host and the new arrivals was taking place, I turned around to notice that I couldn't see the woman. Did she go into another room? Where the hell did she go? I took a seat on the couch and began to relax a bit again. One of the drunk guys plopped down on the other side of the couch where I was sitting on. We were all relaxing with our drinks when suddenly the guy who sat on the same couch as me completely flipped his shit out of nowhere. "You? What the fuck are you doing here? Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out right now." The guy flew backwards from where he was sitting and knocked over a lamp that was on a small end table. He fell over the end table and ended up on the floor. I turned and looked towards where he was looking. The woman was standing there, moving in her eerie, fluid manner. She then let out a sudden dry cackle that almost hurt my ears, it was so loud. The other drunk guy grabbed his friend and said, "Let's get the fuck out of here." He lifted his buddy up off the floor and dragged him out of the house. The entire time, the freaked-out drunk guy was screaming obscenities at the top of his lungs. The man went from low-key drunk buzz to completely losing his mind in no time at all. It was as if he saw a ghost. Once the two drunk guys left, the girl who was friends with the host spoke up. "What the hell is going on? How do you know him?" "You should see. You should all come see." The dark-clothed woman suddenly became wide-eyed. She swept her hand around the room one more time. She then took her long pointed finger and pointed away from the house. "Come, below the 3 crosses. Come see." I needed to break away for a moment to clarify this part of the story. Another odd aspect to this trailer park type neighborhood is that nearby, up on a hill, there was 3 large wooden crosses. I don't know the story behind them. If my memory serves correct, an old church in town got permission to put them up there years and years ago. They rested on top of the hill and can actually be seen from many of the main roads in town. Although until I visited this particular area, I wasn't sure how one actually accessed them. Now I knew. Jay spoke up. "What's up there?" "Me," the woman hissed in reply. "Well, you're already here. Why would we need to go up there?" asked Derek. The woman froze. She finally had stopped moving. But she didn't say anything. She didn't blink or even appear to be breathing anymore. It was as if time itself had suddenly stopped in the area immediately surrounding her. Completely unnerved at this moment, I turned and walked away without saying a word. I walked into the bathroom at the center of the house to collect my thoughts. I headed towards the sink, turned on the cold water and splashed some of it on my face. What happened next, I'm not even sure how to process. The instant the cold water hit my face, it was as if I had suddenly gone into a dream. My vision was suddenly very blurry. All I could make out were colors and the general shapes of things. It was similar to being very, very drunk in terms of my ability to see what was right in front of me. I felt unable to move, as if I was stuck in place. I tried to leave the bathroom but suddenly felt trapped, as if someone was embracing me. But it was far from a warm embrace. It was the feeling of someone holding you to keep you from escaping, the feeling of someone about to harm you. As clear as I could understand anything, I heard her scratchy voice right behind me. "You want to go?" In the next instant, I heard an ear-piercing scream, and then everything went dark. I came to, and I could tell I was sitting down with my back against the wall and legs straight out. I couldn't tell where I was because everything was still very dark. I began to stand myself up by using the nearest thing I could put my hand onto, the sink basin. I'm remembering now I was still in the bathroom. It seemed as though the second I recalled where I was, the lights in the house shot on. I was startled by suddenly seeing my own reflection. My skin looked 2 shades paler and my hair was damp from sweat. What the hell just happened? I washed my hands and face and went out of the bathroom door. All the males were sitting on the couch, all of them staring straight ahead. The host girl was looking out the window with her face mere inches away from the glass. Her friend was sitting at the table by herself, looking at the floor with an empty gaze. The dark-clothed woman was nowhere to be seen. Jay looked up at me. "Are you all right, man? You were in there for like 15 minutes. 15? The whole bizarre experience felt like it had happened over the course of 1 minute. Perhaps 2 at the most. I was too freaked out to be honest about what I had just experienced and quickly turned the attention away from myself. What just happened? Did the lights go out? I heard a noise. Everyone just kind of looked at each other. Finally, Derek spoke up and explained to me what had happened. They had all seen it, and it was no less horrifying than what I had experienced. After I had gone into the bathroom, apparently the woman remained frozen in place for what felt like a good minute or 2. Finally, the host girl asked her to leave. The dark-clothed woman then came back to life. She said that she had found someone who would come and see with her and that it had already been decided. When they asked what it was she was referring to, she said, "Your friend. I have him now," and pointed towards the bathroom. I got chills and nearly wanted to faint when I was told this part of the story. Regardless, I swallowed my fear and listened to the rest of it. The woman began to move more and more in her strange way. She kept repeating over and over again, "I have him now. I have him now." Then things got truly fucked up. The dark-clothed woman's features began to distort in a way. When I asked for clarification, Derek had a very hard time making sense of it. He paused, collected himself a bit, then continued. It was like her legs started to bend the other way, like her knees were backwards, like they'd be on the back legs of a horse. She kept moving her arms, and they seemed like they just got gradually longer and longer. Her fingers, too. They got like long and spindly. I was aghast. "What the hell? What did you guys do?" "Nothing." The female host turned away from the window as she spoke up. "It was like we couldn't do anything. Everyone was just stuck, like a heavy feeling in the room, like I couldn't breathe. Did anyone else feel that way?" Everyone nodded in agreement. The female host continued. "So finally, I yelled out at her that she needed to leave. And oh God," she turned back away towards the window and started to cry. The room fell silent again. "And? What happened?" I felt fascinated and nauseated at the same time. Derek jumped back in and finished the story. Her neck, it twisted, like she cocked it to the side. But it just kept going, to where her head was at a 90-degree angle to her body. And Jesus, man, I heard snapping, like bones snapping. Her fucking head kept turning, man. Jay set his beer down and jumped in. And her mouth opened up, like way wider than it should have been able to. Then that was that scream. Jesus, I've never heard anything like it before. That was when the lights went out. I was stunned. literally unable to move or speak. I felt like I was going to vomit, but I didn't want to show just how upset the situation had made me. Jay changed his tone back to one of concern. Are you all right? Did you hear any of this in there? Yes, I heard the scream. I was in there, just sick as all. I have no idea why I didn't want to tell them about my portion of the experience. My logical brain was saying that I should tell them, but something held me back. It turned out no one knew who she was. No one even knew how she got into the house. When the lights came back on, apparently the host went to lock the back door, but it was already locked. That was the room we first saw her in. Had she come in through the front, we would have noticed her right away, as we did the other two drunk guys that were there earlier. I decided it would be best to leave. I grabbed a beer for the road, and most of the rest of the party decided to head out as well. The only ones who stayed were the two girls. As I was getting into my car, Jay pulled me aside. I'm sorry I brought you here, man. You should have never come. I had no reply. I only saw the sadness and regret in his eyes. I drove home, slammed the beer, and passed out. That night, I had a strange dream. I dreamt I was looking up the hill where the 3 crosses stood. The sky was a blood-red sunset. Even though it was light outside, it truly wasn't. For all I could see was a silhouette of the crosses and her. I can see her dancing, moving slowly below the shadow of the crosses. There is a sound in my ears. It's like a vibrating wind that blows through a cave, but it's inside of my ear canals. It's cold and unnerving. This sound is all I can hear. As I watch her dance over and over, she beckons me. Despite how uncomfortable I am compelled to go towards her. I get closer and closer. When I feel like I am within reach of the dark-clothed woman, I feel myself drop straight into the earth. Everything goes dark. The wind sound in my head becomes unbearably loud, and my brain feels like icicles are stabbing the very center. I can't breathe, and I feel as though death is seconds away. Then I woke up, gasping for air in a cold sweat. The truth is, I've had this dream almost every night since the event. On my way to the bar I work at, I can see the crosses from the roadway. I'm almost always compelled to look at them. One time I came to a complete stop in the middle of the street and was completely transfixed by them. It wasn't until someone honked their horn that I snapped out of it and went on my way. I'm even certain that one time I saw her dancing beneath the crosses as I drove by. I nearly got into a wreck from swerving off the road. I have to admit, I think she has me. Because I went up there, friends. I went below the 3 wooden crosses, and I'm not sure what to think of what I found. I decided that the nightmares were too much. I had to see what it was that lurks below those crosses. I grabbed a combat knife that I keep next to my bed at night and tucked it underneath my jacket. I parked my car nearby and went to look at whatever it was I was going to find. Keep in mind that this is months later. It was significantly colder and snowier than the night that the event happened. I hiked up the hill feeling the entire time like I was being pulled by a rope. Even though I felt afraid, I felt something else stronger than the fear compelled me to charge up the hill as fast as I could muster without slipping and breaking my head open. I reached the crest of the hill and gazed at the crosses. The wind was whipping up here, and I felt a cold sting in my ears. Not as painful as in the nightmares, but certainly enough to be a reminder of them. I looked around and saw nothing but the crosses at first. Dirt and weeds and nearby trees were all I saw. Then I walked closer. It appeared almost instantly. I'm sure it was already there. But it's somewhat well hidden, and if someone wasn't paying attention, they could fall right in. But it almost felt as if the earth just opened up. It's a hole. No, fuck that. It's an abyss. A dark black abyss that goes straight down to nothingness. It's deep enough to where seeing the bottom is impossible, even in full daylight. I threw a stone down there to see if I could hear where the bottom might be. Nothing. Silence. I managed to pull myself away and write this story, and I will tell you this. I'm not free of whatever it is that haunts me up there. I am still compelled to see what is in that abyss. and what it is that's calling to me. She was right. She has me.